Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along to this verbal reasoning workshop. I'm going to start by just sharing my screen. Hopefully you'll all be able to see this okay. We have sent out a booklet to you. If you haven't received it, just let our office know and we'll ping it over to you via email. So this workshop really is all about understanding a little bit more about verbal reasoning. And as I said earlier, it isn't just about thinking about verbal reasoning for GL assessment. Also, if your child is doing potentially an online CEM test, we can cover off some of the question types that appear in that as well. Also for Reading Boys as well. Reading Boys familiarisation material often talks about it being English vocabulary, but we sort of, I suppose, do often associate it more so with verbal reasoning. At the beginning, I asked a question, what is verbal reasoning? What does it entail? And of course, it does involve a lot of vocabulary related questions. It also relates to code related questions. And I always think, quite strangely, also maths questions involved as well. So we will hopefully have an opportunity to have a look at all three of those categories as we go along. I thought just a good idea, really, actually, just to talk about the grammar schools themselves briefly, because I think it is important that you understand what verbal reasoning relates to in terms of GL assessment. So for the 13 grammar schools that are in Buckinghamshire, they all use GL assessment as their testing body. Also, interestingly, within Berkshire, then Kendrick have moved across to GL assessment. So this was the first year of them actually using a GL assessment exam in September. And of course, the Slough Consortium is also under GL assessment. Just to point out, with the Slough Consortium, your child just does one sitting for all 4 grammar schools. I have been asked a few times about, is it a case that it's the same exam for Buckinghamshire and the same exam for Berkshire? No, but it is the same exam body, but those papers will be different. And I suppose, certainly from our perspective, then it does make life easier now that we are teaching under one umbrella, if you like, rather than doing CEM and GL. It is very much about teaching a GL syllabus. But of course, for Reading Boys, then they have a slightly separate syllabus that they're working to under a company called Future Stories, and they do focus on creative writing. And interestingly, when we talk about vocabulary, of course, we know how that impacts writing skills as well. So there's just a list of those grammar schools, and my advice is always the same around grammar schools, that you do go and have a look around, take your child with you, get a feel for that school. And certainly for our year 5 parents, then we'd recommend you do that this year in terms of open evenings and open days. Go and have a look around the schools and get an understanding of what their specialisms are, what they do, listen to the head teacher, give a talk, and get familiar with those different schools. Okay, I hope there's no questions about that. I hope that sort of makes sense in terms of what we predominantly cover in terms of grammar school 11 plus support. So just as an introduction, we encourage all of our children to build their vocabulary. We know how important that is. It isn't something that can be done overnight. It would be lovely, wouldn't it, if we could just wake up one day and go, oh, I know all of these words, but it doesn't quite work like that. So vocabulary building takes time, and please don't be surprised if your child doesn't know a huge amount of words. That may be something that they need to develop and work on. And of course, reading is a key skill to that. The more a child reads, it tends to obviously have a greater impact on building their word knowledge. I do find as well, if you can incorporate lots of word building games and things at home, that has a huge impact. I will share some of those with you today, and we'll look at some apps and some websites that we certainly know have had a good impact on building that word knowledge. I think the other thing to bear in mind is that it's also important to spend that time going back over words again. And, it's all very well showing or telling a child, right, this is what the word means, putting it into context, but it is about repetition. It is about going back through those words. And hence why we use things like word and meaning books, so that children can record down the words and revisit them again. And would really encourage children to use that book. And of course, if you're not familiar with that, this is the word and meaning book. It looks a little bit like that inside. So the idea being that it's in alphabetical order. So any word that your child doesn't know and is unfamiliar with, they put it in that book, write a short definition, and then they've got it captured forever then. And certainly nearer the exam, there's a good opportunity, of course, to go back to that book and revise that vocabulary. The other thing we realise with a lot of the code-related questions that we'll look at today, they do rely on a specific technique and strategy. Once children know that technique, they can tend to apply that when they go into the examination. But of course, it is about accuracy. It's about making sure that they are taking care when they're doing these code-related questions. And again, we'll have a look at some of those today. The other thing I thought I'd just share with you very quickly is just the weighting of GL assessment in Buckinghamshire. And we assume that this also applies to Kendrick and the Slough Consortium. So 50% of the exam is made up of verbal reasoning, comprehension and SPAG. So a very large proportion of the exam itself. 25% is non-verbal spatial reasoning, and then 25% is mathematics. In terms of Reading Boys, then they have an English paper, they have a maths paper and a creative writing paper. Part of the English paper does involve vocabulary related questions, and those are things like antonyms, synonyms, missing letters, multiple meanings. What you just need to be aware of, there are no code related questions under Reading Boys. They don't set those. They're obviously not using GL assessment. They're not using CEM. So they've sort of created their own exam syllabus with a company called Future Stories. But it does, as I say, rely heavily on a good vocabulary and a good word knowledge. So still really, really important. These are just a set of questions that we often get asked about verbal reasoning. I thought I would start with these first, if it's okay, just to give you an idea. So that first question, what percentage of the GL exam comprises of verbal reasoning? So as we say, 50% is verbal and English. Big question number 2. How can we improve my child's vocabulary? And we do get asked that all the time. How are we going to do it? And of course, yeah, engaging reading books, having a drive to learn new words as well, and having a hunger to build their vocabulary. And I think certainly conversationally as well, if you can use words at home in your everyday conversations and try and take every opportunity when a word comes up to try and reinforce that with your child. Our course does rely on a good word knowledge. We do emphasize to the children how important it is to have a good vocabulary, but we realize, of course, it does take time. And as I mentioned earlier, it isn't something that children are just going to know overnight. They've got to take that time to build that word vocabulary up. There are lots of games that we'll talk about today that we just think are great to use to enhance vocabulary. So we'll go through some of those. One of the questions we also get asked is, will my child be allowed a dictionary in the exam? Unfortunately not. Obviously, they can't take in a dictionary into the test itself. Interesting, dictionaries do raise quite a few questions, actually. I mean, I think for children nowadays, and modern technology means that if they don't know a word, they're going to check it on the computer, check it on the iPad, and get that instant gratification, I suppose, about what a word means. But I still think there's a place for a dictionary, and certainly antonyms and synonyms dictionaries are really, really good. So you look up a word and it gives you lots of words that mean the same, so similar to a thesaurus. But the thing that's a benefit of an antonyms and a synonyms dictionary, it gives you the opposite in meaning. And I'll try and look for one later. I'll actually put a link to an antonyms and synonyms book, which we think is really, really good. Someone's asking in the chat, is the whole list going to be GL assessment? We will be looking predominantly at GL assessment today, but there's also an overlap, of course, with Reading Boys as well. But we will not be looking at CEM, and the reason being that CEM is now an online testing platform. It may come up in some independent schools. I have some independent schools locally to me that use CEM, Farnborough Hill being one, but now, in terms of the 11 plus, it will not be a CEM exam that your child sits. It will be either a GL assessment or a Future Stories. So yeah, those list of schools that I provided earlier, sorry, just going back to that, just to clarify. So Buckinghamshire is GL assessment. The Kendrick School in Reading is also GL assessment, along with that Slough Consortium. Okay, so just to be clear that GL will set those exams certainly for the next few years. I mean, these tender of contracts tend to last about 3 or 4 years, and then it can sometimes swip over. But really, there's no one really to move to now. I think GL, certainly unless it becomes an online test, is going to be around for certainly a long time. So yeah, just back to the dictionaries. I think children using dictionaries is a really good idea, but I think certainly children also do want to be able to get that instant feedback on what a word means. I think sometimes with dictionaries, children can read the definition and there's still no clearer on what that word means. So what I would certainly be saying then, that an antonyms and a synonyms dictionary can really help with that, because if it gives you lots of words that mean the same as another word, it's probably very likely that your child will know at least 1 or 2 of those. So that sort of gives them that, I suppose, reassurance. They know what that word means. Where shall we record new words? Well, we did just talk about it, that word and meaning book, a great place to record down those new words. Really, really good place to have them. What is the best approach when using word lists with my child is a question we often get asked. I think Teacher Right believes that learning words should be fun, and finding words within words. I know lots of our tutors, when they do the spellings, try and make them as fun as they possibly can, and coming up with little funny mnemonics and things like that really help children retain those words. I always remember as a child really struggling with the word necessary, until someone said, well, if you think of 1 collar and 2 socks, you can't go wrong. So 1 C and 2 S's. And again, little things like that really help. So putting words into context is really important. When your child is presented with a long list of words, it can be very off-putting. And I know Teacher Right obviously provides you with a little booklet, has lots of words in it. And I think the best way to tackle that is get a highlighter, get your child to go through, highlight the ones they definitely know. And it's really important they know multiple meanings as well. It's all very well knowing one meaning. Do they know all the meanings that that word has? So if we take a word like, let's take the word address, for example, we all know the address where we live, but what about an address as in a speech? Does your child know those different meanings? And that is a really big part of the 11 plus. Generally with words in, certainly in practice papers and things like that, familiarization papers, we realize that GL tests that knowledge of multiple meaning words. So that's something to also be aware of. Sometimes it's the more obscure meaning that a child doesn't know. I also think playing simple matching games. And there are lots of games that you can do with things like compound words, where you mix up a lot of words and try and match them together. You can do it with synonyms. You can do it with antonyms. I brought a couple of games back from the office today. And one of them is, if you can all just about make out, this is called Whiz Opposites. And this is a fantastic game to play with children. Really good fun. Vocabulary is all 11 plus appropriate. And that's all about matching up words, so which is really great. Just as we're going through this workshop, then there are some questions that are popping in the chat. So I will just read this one out from one parent. What would you propose to enhance vocabulary where main language is non-English at home? What would be more effective to keep up with? I think that's such a good question. And of course, if English is not your first language at home, then you need to find a way of enhancing your child's vocabulary. I must admit, subtitles on TV are quite good. And I certainly know families that have done that in the past, where if your child does watch TV, then actually putting on the subtitles at the same time can be a very, very good way of enhancing vocabulary. But of course, as we mentioned earlier, going back to the reading element, that your child does need to do, I would say reading every day is important. And that can be not only things like reading books, but also magazines, comics. Sometimes it's a case, particularly for a reluctant reader, it really doesn't matter what they're reading, as long as they are spending time reading different types of texts. And what we know with the 11 plus, and particularly if we relate to the comprehension activity, we don't know what the comprehension will be. Will it be fiction? Will it be non-fiction? Will it be a poem, for example, that could come up? I know in Birmingham, where we run a number of centres, a poem came up in the 11 plus. So again, having that exposure to different types of vocabulary. I mean, obviously with poetry, it tends to be maybe slightly more archaic, and actually developing your knowledge of poetry is also something we would recommend. So I think certainly, yeah, if you aren't speaking English at home as your mother tongue or your first language, then it is trying to find ways where your child is building up that vocabulary. And that may be through word games, that may well be, as I say, something like subtitles on the TV, something whereby you know they are getting that exposure, and that's really, really important. So what we're going to talk about now are some of those question types that have appeared within the 11 plus, and just give you a little bit of an idea of what they're like. So one of the most common types is closest in meaning. We do have different names for this. Of course, sometimes you'll hear it called synonyms or similar in meaning, and they can be presented in different formats. I will show you today what the sort of common formats are in terms of GL, but of course, if you're going for Reading Boys, it may well be laid out slightly differently. When we introduce this question type to children, we often use flashcards and things within the lessons. This one here, which is the Bond vocabulary flashcards, they're really, really good for building synonyms and antonyms. Is the comprehension in the verbal reasoning part of the GL? No, it's not. So a really good question from one of the parents in the chat. The actual comprehension is a separate part of the exam. It usually is the start of paper 1, comprehension, then spelling, punctuation and grammar, then a break or that they stop the timer, if you like, and then the next section in the first paper is verbal reasoning, and it tends to be about 20 minutes long, and it can range from sort of 40 to 50 questions that the children would have to do. So in terms of vocabulary building with flashcards, that can be another good way. And there are lots of different types of flashcards out there. I'll just shift over here, just show you this one. This is Foxton's. This is a relatively new one on the market. Quite good, very comprehensive, lots of words in there. And again, there are lots of Collins flashcards as well, which we recommend very often. And they're a good way of building vocabulary. I have also got this little book on here, the Synonyms and Antonyms book. And for a number of your children who are with us now, certainly in year 5, you may have had that book. I will say that some of the vocabulary in there is quite challenging, that if your child only knows, say, 50% of the words, that's absolutely fine. I think it's important to recognise where that book has stemmed from. So Christine Draper is a teacher in a grammar school. She's invigilated a number of 11 plus exams over the years, and she compiled this book by actually dragging the words out of the exams and putting them tidily into a book. So if you're kind of looking at the words going, goodness me, these are quite challenging, you need to understand where those words have come from. So it's a very authentic text in terms of being very much related and appropriate to the 11 plus. But don't worry if you do find your child saying, oh, what does that mean? Oh, I've never come across that word before. Kind of, you've got to make them obviously enjoy that process. But if they are going for the dictionary or they're looking the words up online, that's absolutely fine. It is a gradual progression. We will come back to lots of these words again, and they'll see these words, I'm sure, repetitively throughout the Teach It Right course. But yeah, if you are thinking, oh, that book has been quite difficult in block 1, don't worry about it. You're not alone. What we don't want to be doing is making it so easy that the words are all known, and that's a problem. You know, if we were just giving the words in the lessons that children know and they know the definitions of, then there's no advantage. We have to extend their vocabulary. We have to ensure that we are making them aware of the types of words that will be in the 11 plus, and we know, I think certainly for all the children that we've got through the 11 plus, and I'm very thankful to say that on Friday when the results came out, then our phone was ringing off the hook, so to speak, and lots and lots of children doing incredibly well, which is incredibly heartwarming. But I also realized one of the things they all had in common was they had a hunger to learn those words. So just down the bottom of this slide, you'll see one way that this
Hi,
can...
Chris. Sorry, I've got a
Sure.
question. With
Sure.
regards to the flashcards, so you've shown us the Bond ones and also the Foxtons ones.
Yeah.
Is there one that is better? Because I think the Foxtons ones have quite a lot of flashcards in them compared to the Bond ones, or do we get
it's a good point, Mum, actually, because I think with the Foxtons ones, it's quite big and chunky, and there's, you know, it is quite, you know, there's a lot of words in there, but there are some more, what I would say, more condensed versions. So I'm just going to see, sorry, just bear with me a minute, because I'm just going to find, we had a company that came in to Teach It Right before, and they brought in some vocabulary flashcards, which we thought were fantastic. And they were very much contained in a little box. But the reason I like them, and I'll just bring up a picture of this on the screen. So shrink that down. These ones here have the words on them, but not only that, they have a sentence to put that word into context. And I think that's quite important, because if we look at the Bond ones there, they don't do that. They're very good for little games in the classroom, but not so good for, you know, children actually knowing how to put that word into context. But the other thing that they do is not only do they list synonyms down, they also list the antonyms as well. So this would probably be my go-to, because the other thing that's on there as well is a little key ring. Well, there's two key rings inside. So when a child knows a word, the novel aspect of it is that they put the card onto the key ring and they're sort of revising, I suppose, with it. So I think this is a really, really good one. I will just put that link into the chat for you all, so you can peruse that in your own time. So it's come up quite big, but you can click on there and you can find a link to those flashcards. So if we are comparing Bond, if we compare Collins, if we compare the Foxtons ones, I would certainly say these are the best. It is sometimes down to personal choice. I think if you're looking for something whereby the words are really big and they're easy to see, Collins is probably better. These are quite small on the cards, but again, it's very much what works best for you and your child. But certainly those are ones that I would recommend. So again, just in terms of that presentation of the question type, so we've got here the word rigid, and we're looking for a word that means the same. One of the strategies that we often encourage children to use in the 11 plus is a process of elimination. So it's about ruling out the words that we know are wrong. And that sort of limits children's possibilities. And I think certainly with the 11 plus, this is one of the greatest tools we can give the children, because if they are left with two options, there's kind of a 50-50 chance of getting that question right. I sometimes find as well with synonyms that if you aren't quite sure of all the words in that question, sometimes that doesn't matter. You can still get to the right answer. So that's kind of a nice comfort for the children as well. They don't necessarily need to know every single word in every question. They may still be able to arrive at the right answer. So rigid and flexible. So what we would expect the children to do is read all the words that they've given, and then start to consider, right, which ones are closest in meaning. So rigid and flexible. Flexible, you would really classify as an antonym to rigid. So you can rule that one out. Harnessed, sometimes fine with the word harness. Sometimes children wouldn't know what that word means, so that's fine. Maybe we leave that one. Lean, probably know what lean means, but it's certainly not a synonym for rigid, so we rule out that word. We then go to stiff and biased. And again, bias might be new for children, but they may have heard of the word stiff. And if they can put that word then into the same sentence, and I think the example that we give in the booklet relates to a door handle was rigid, a door handle was stiff, you know then that that word is going to mean the same. I think it is also important to realize with synonyms that we are putting the same word groups together. So it would be verbs with verbs, adjectives with adjectives, adverbs with adverbs, that that is also something that we want to teach children, is about understanding the different word groups that are there. And that's something, again, that we build into the course. So we know what the answer is, and we would select that on a separate multiple choice sheet. So children will have a separate multiple choice sheet where they transfer their answer over. But in terms of the question sheet, they can scribe what they like, and certainly elimination is a good way of doing it. If we then go to the next slide, so there's that question again, and what I've added in here is a link to a website called FreeRice, and it's been around for a very, very long time, but it's really, really good for enhancing a knowledge of synonyms. And again, I'm going to put that into the chat because I would like you to utilize this, particularly for synonyms. I think it's a really good one to use. So www.freerice.com, a really, really good one for English vocabulary. And I think when children get a question right, they donate rice into a world food program as well, which I think is really, really great. So good fun, that one. Okay. Obviously, synonyms is very popular, and also antonyms is a very popular question type as well. So this is one way of laying it out, where you have the word in bold at the top, a bit like where we had rigid earlier. And we've got the word abundance, and then we have to find the word which is the opposite in meaning. I'll just show you now, though, what that would look like from an 11 plus perspective for GL assessment. So I've just taken a snippet from some familiarization papers, but what I thought was quite interesting to look at is the multiple choice sheet and how that's presented, and then also how it would look from a GL point of view. So the way GL do opposite and closest in meaning is they have 3 words on the left, 3 words on the right, and then you choose 1 word from each set, which is an antonym. And then, as you can see, look, you've got the words written down here, and then on the multiple choice sheet, they're repeated there. So if we take the example, we know early and late, of course, is the opposite. But just looking at question 30 there, we would encourage children to transfer. So they would go break, poke. Don't think that's opposite. Break and miss. No. Break and aim. No. And the reason you encourage the children to transfer the words over is so they don't miss any opportunities there to find the best possible answer. And of course, in this particular one, we've got hit, as in on a target, or miss. So on your multiple choice sheet, the way the children would do it, they'd make a little horizontal line. So hit and miss to indicate the answer. If they make a mistake, they would rub it out, and then they would put what they think the right answer is. Just in terms of Reading boys, because I will mention with Reading boys, they don't use a pencil, they use a pen. So when they use their multiple choice sheet, they have to put a cross through their answer and then select which one it will be. So again, slightly different technique. But with GL assessment for Buckinghamshire and the Slough Consortium, always in pencil, and if they make a mistake, they rub it out and put the right answer. Number 31. What do we think the answer is to that one? You're more than welcome in the chat as well. There'll be plenty of opportunities, hopefully, this afternoon for you to have a go. Cheap and dear, or very quick, fantastic. I always find dear an interesting one because, of course, children may probably associate it very often with a letter, but do they think about it as inexpensive? And how often would a child actually use that word like that? Would they go into a shop and say, oh, goodness me, these trainers are dear? Probably not. So again, it is interesting, isn't it? Certainly how vocabulary has evolved over the time, but also how we do need to spend time putting those words into context so they understand what they mean. So we've got cheap and dear there. And then on 32, quite an easy one, modern and new. So let's go to, sorry, modern and old. We're on antonyms, aren't we? So again, on that multiple choice sheet, you can then mark that down. Are there any questions around opposites and synonyms or closest in meaning? Is there anything else anyone wants to ask?
Sorry, Chris, I want to know what about reading boys? You said if they use the pen, so if they did a mistake, what will happen? How
Yeah,
can
so
change it?
they don't use a pencil, they do use a pen. So the idea being they'd have a series of ovals that they shade in, but if they make a mistake, they would do a cross through it like that, and then they would mark the right answer. What is really important, and they will practice that with us, that they do those right demarcations. There is a familiarization booklet for Reading Boys on the Reading Boys website, and that lays out very clearly as well how they need to demarcate that multiple choice sheet. But don't worry, that's something again that we'll practice at Teach It Right, so they're familiar. I don't really know why they don't use a pencil, really, but it's just something that's changed. They now use a pen. But we will go through that with the children. And also actually practicing with a pen as well is something to worth doing. Of course, when they do their creative writing, they would use a pen as well when they're doing that part. Okay, shall we move on to a slightly different question type? I'm going to go down to this one here. So odd one out or odd two out, as the case may be. So this is another very, very popular question type, both for Reading Boys and for GL assessment. For GL assessment, it tends to be odd two out, whereas with Reading Boys, it tends to be odd one out. But the concept is very much the same, that we encourage children, rather than looking for the odd ones out, to actually consider the words that go together. Now, in this example here, we've got plateau, peak, summit, and top. And again, sometimes the words that they use do have multiple meanings, but it's about identifying the word that doesn't belong. But by grouping the others together, hopefully that will leave you with the odd one out. This is one of the question types which does involve also a lot of general knowledge. And we talk a lot at Teach It Right about knowing things like animals young, knowing your basic capital cities, knowing your trees, your flowers, your herbs, your spices. And that is all about developing children's word knowledge and understanding. And I know odd one out has come up within the lessons in this block, and some of the children have needed help with understanding words like cygnet, for example. They didn't all know that it was a baby swan. And actually getting those opportunities with you, with your children, to actually talk about these kind of words. And if you're going out for a walk, talking about types of trees and types of flowers is really important. And we do know that there may only be one or two questions that come up which rely on that general knowledge, but we want children to have that advantage. And there are lots of ways of doing that in terms of recording down animals young, for example, or different capital cities, just going through those, just seeing if the children do have that understanding. It is one of the more challenging question types. The reason for this very large looking button here that just says odd is this is a company called Lucky Gecko. And Lucky Gecko have a series of apps, really, really good. I'm afraid they're only available on Apple devices. I don't think you can get them on Android, but they do synonyms, antonyms, odd ones out, really gamey. So the idea is children have 3 lives. They have to try and keep those lives for as long as they can. And they are fantastic. So Lucky Gecko apps, well worth having a look at. They're not hugely expensive. As you can see here, $1.99, I think, for the animal knowledge one. But I always recommend these every year. I think they are fantastic. The company that's produced them is a sort of renowned tuition company, and they certainly know what they're doing. And I think they've hit the nail on the head to find something that's the children are really engaged in, but also that the level of words that they use really appropriate, fantastic resource that. So yeah, odd one out or odd two out is another very popular type of question, and I would encourage children again develop their own general knowledge to support them with that. Okay, just going to have a look at another question type now. This is called multiple meaning. And again, please do have a look at your booklets. The booklets will cover all of these. And certainly today, some of the question types I will need to go through quite quickly just to make sure we get an opportunity to get through as many as we can. There are about 21 different types of question for verbal reasoning. GL Assessment have sort of kept those question types very much the same since I've been doing it. But yeah, 21 altogether. I think with the word ones, I think there's probably about 8 or 9 word ones, and then we've got the codes and of course the 4 maths ones as well. So let's just have a little talk about multiple meaning. So we have 2 sets of words in brackets here, and then we have 5 choices. Now, one of these words, obviously only one of them, will have the same meaning as world and globe, and then also have the same meaning as soil and ground. I did emphasize at the beginning of this workshop that words with double meaning are really important, and children do need to spend time building that word knowledge up. So you may well have a separate list at home with words with a multiple meaning, and it can be just a really good opportunity just to test whether they know both of them. So sometimes a word will go with one group, but it may not go with another. So again, that's really, really important. And of course, the answer to this one is earth, because it has a similar meaning to world and globe, and it also goes with soil and ground. I do find with example questions, and this is also applicable to GL Assessment, the answer questions are a lot easier than the questions they'll actually get. And I guess that's just because they're just trying to show them what to do and give them an understanding. If you're looking for an answer around how many questions per type, it's on average about 7. So there would be, say, 7 multiple meanings, 7 closest in meaning, 7 opposites, and no more than that. CEM used to have a lot more. It was like, you know, if it was synonyms, it could have been like 26 questions they would be given, but not for GL. GL is very much more sort of bite-sized chunks of question types. So that again just sort of emphasizes that that need to maybe eliminate and cross out the ones that are not correct. Right, we'll move on to another one now. This is called hidden 3-letter word, and I've got some for you to have a go at in a moment. So children are given a sentence, and then they're given a set of letters in capitals or in bold, and removed from there is a 3-letter word, and that's going to be the answer. So the most important thing is to read the sentence, but also go beyond the capital letters. So for example, here we've got the cat scratched him with his. So we think, well, what would the cat scratch him with? It's very likely to be his claws. So you write the word down. Sometimes children don't always need to write it down. It's up to them, but they are given lots of space in the exam to scribble things down. And if they don't know the answer immediately, or they do need to spell it out, they write the word down. So we'd write down the word claws. And as I've illustrated down the bottom, you can see you cross out the letters you are given. So we were given a C, we were given an S, and that leaves you with the word law. And that's the answer. I think these are good fun. I think children enjoy these. These are quite puzzly. So I've got another little snippet here. I've chosen 4 questions from a GL paper. I'd like you to have a go at those. So you've got your options underneath. You've got your sentence. Try and work out, and it will always be 3 letters, what 3 letters have been removed from those letters in capitals. Does the word always go in between the 2 letters? No, it doesn't. It could come at the beginning. It could go at the end. It could go anywhere within that set of letters in capitals. hope these are all fairly straightforward, but worth having a go at. Oh, fantastic. One of the mums has already listed all 4 of them. Fantastic. Great. Well done. I do like these. I think they're good fun. And also it's worth, when you're doing spellings with children, actually talking about what we call shy words. So that's kind of words within other words, because that really relates to a question type like this. So I don't know, if you had a word like, I'm trying to think of one now. Say if I had the word comfortable, I can see the word for in there. I can see the word tab in there. And again, just having that opportunity to talk about words within words. So you could imagine then how that could be then put into a question whereby the tab or the for's been removed and it's put into some sort of sentence to try and work out what those 3 letters could be. But shy words is certainly a good thing to do. Okay. Thank you so much, guys, for having a go at these. Should we just quickly go down through, make sure we're all in agreement with what these answers are? So his favourite food was, well, this is a bit of a surprise, but it is cabbage. So A, of course, is the answer because bag has been removed from there. 53, the car's something in the bad weather. So you'd be saying to a child, well, what would a car do in bad weather? And of course, it's skidded. So it will be kid. So again, children may well spell it out and then cross out the letters that they were given. So the S is taken away. They need to make sure they cross out the right D, D-E-D, to leave you with that word kid in there, in the middle there. He's something for more space in the room. And of course, he begged. So egg would be the answer. Sometimes in the exam, they're not always given the multiple choice options underneath. We know that with some question types. So if they're not, then they should go to the multiple choice sheet and have a look at the options that they're given, because it may be that they slot those 3 letters into the gap. So that again may be something that happens. So we've got bag there, we've got kid, and we've got egg. I know it's just behind you there, the other one. So I'll just move it down a little bit so we can see the last one. So 55, the morning was spent something the garden. So again, if the child's not quite sure what maybe would happen in the garden, if there was lots of leaves they needed to get rid of, maybe they spent the whole morning clearing the garden. So the word that we need there is ear. I sometimes find with these questions that if there is one particularly that a child is stuck on, really can't work it out, then it is worth either rereading the sentence, trying to establish by using the letters they've already given me for any clues. For example, that last one has ing in it. Ing is very likely to go, of course, at the end of that word. So again, using those kind of clues about letter strings, about the combinations of letters, can help a child, of course, arrive at the right answer. Are there any questions about missing 3-letter words? Anything you'd like to ask? Well, thank you very much for giving those a go and also doing so well on those. Brilliant. Let's go and have a look at another question type, shall we? So this is called move a letter, and it involves 2 words, and the children have to take 1 letter from one word and put it into another word, making 2 new words. It'll obviously only be 1 letter that's transferred across, and sometimes where children can find these questions quite difficult is it may make 1 word on one side, but it may not make a word on the other. So it's very important the letter that they transfer over makes 2 new words. And the example, and this is the same example that GL use in their exams, is pound and or. And of course, if you take the U from pound, it goes between O and R for hour. So the answer would be U. So let me just show you how this would look in the examination itself. So I've kept that example there of pound and on. I'm just going to move it up a little bit just so you can see it clearly. And I'll move in the multiple choice sheet. So on number 1, we've got metal and though. So we always encourage the children with these kind of questions, obviously start with the first letter. Sometimes children will just see it straight away, which is brilliant. And of course, when you're doing an exam, time is obviously not on your side. And we often get asked, well, how long should a child take to do a question like this? With the 11 plus, one of the timings that's often put out there is about 30 seconds per question. We would say certainly though with word related questions, it's probably about half that time. So you'd be looking at sort of 10 to 15 seconds to answer a question like this. We'll look at other questions today whereby, no, you wouldn't necessarily be able to do them in 30 seconds. It would take you longer, and that's fine. But it's all about sort of time management, if you like, in the exam. And we don't sort of deal too much with time management at this stage. We've still got a lot that we need to teach the children, a lot of knowledge they need to acquire. But as we go through the course, then, yeah, we would make them more aware of how long they're taking. So again, as we were doing with the other one, would you like to have a go at these 3? All you need to do in the chat is just put the letter that you think jumps from the first word on the left into the word on the right. Someone's asking, will this recording be shared after the session? Yes, it will be. I will share this link with you. We will upload it onto YouTube so you're able to watch it back, and that will be done first thing tomorrow. So yes, please look out for that in your inbox. Or a particular parent doing incredibly well tonight, just really, really quick. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, as an adult, and yeah, being able to do these questions quite quickly. But of course, we're not the ones taking the test. So, you know, how would your child fare with these? And, you know, would they be able to? Would they be able to work them out? And of course, it is for us to expose them to these question types, make sure they're familiar with them, and understand what the approaches are. So in a question type like this, taking one letter at a time, generally if a word has 2 vowels, very often it might be one of those vowels that comes out. I think also when you are looking at these, you do have to be a good speller as well. So let's just go through and see if we have understood these ones. So the number 1, it is the T that we'll take out for meal, and then the T will go at the end for thought. That letter that we're moving can go anywhere within that second word. It could go at the beginning, could go in the middle, could go at the end. This one here, we've got line, and this is an example of this where the R goes in there for brother. And again, you can see how it's laid out on the multiple choice sheet, quite small. I've always known from colleagues at GL Assessment, they say, well, yeah, the multiple choice sheet is not big and easy to work with. Children have to be quite, have quite good dexterity, I think, actually, with marking these. So they mark that with a horizontal line, nice and clearly. And then with this one, mark the R there, as you can see on question 2. I think sometimes when we do first work with the multiple choice sheet, children sometimes circle things or tick things, but they do need that practice of doing a nice clear horizontal line to indicate what their answer is. Sure, many of you know, but the multiple choice is marked by an optical reader. It scans over those marks that children have made. Another reason why those marks need to be clear. I'm pleased one of the parents earlier asked about Reading Boys, because we believe that it's probably done manually, because if they are using a pen and they're crossing things out, it probably doesn't use an optical reader, but certainly with GL Assessment it would do. And number 3, it will be the I that leaps out and goes in there to make paint. So well done if you got those free. So far we've looked at synonyms, we've looked at opposites, we've looked at multiple meanings, we've looked at hidden three-letter words, we've now looked at move a letter. So already we've touched on about 5 out of the 21. We're now going to move on to the next question type. This one's called insert the letter and relies on children's spelling knowledge. Children have to be good at spelling. And I always find sometimes with vocabulary, it's not just about the big words that children need to know. The little words are just as important. The question type we've just seen, this question type, we're going to look at another one in a moment called hidden 4-letter words, is actually reliant on a knowledge of smaller words. And it is really important to also build up that knowledge as well. So it might well be you have a list of 3-letter words, 4-letter words, 5-letter words that you will encourage your children to know. So just a couple of examples of words. A word like veto. Does your child know what that means? A word like or. A word like ion. A word like arid. And I could go on and on. I know recently in the one lesson I was in, they were talking about an urn. Children obviously associate it with earn as in to earn money rather than an urn with ashes in. So again, little words and building that vocabulary up around those smaller words is also really, really important. So what's involved here? Well, we've got a set of letter strings either side of a question mark. So the letter that goes into the gap, and it will be the same letter in both gaps, completes one word, starts another, finishes one word, starts another one. So it's really important that the letter that goes in doesn't just make 2 words or 3 words or even 1 word, it actually makes all 4. So in this one, we've got T, and of course it makes meet, table, sit, and top. All quite easy words to know there, but of course that is an example. So if we move down to question 8, 9, and 10, you've already been brilliant this afternoon at having a go. Would you like to give those 3 a go? What I'll do, I'll just make it a little bit bigger for you all so you can see it all. Who's going to be the first parent this time? So what letter will go into those gaps? They do find these quite like a puzzle in many ways. They're, for children, when they do these, they do find them good fun. Oh, we're on fire this afternoon. Well done, whoever iPhone is. Yeah, fantastic. It must be, and for some people putting a letter down, it would work with some of the words, but it wouldn't work with all of them. So you just need to be careful that the letter you're choosing, so we've got A to E, and then we've got the letter associated there, it's got to make 4 words, not 3 or 2. So again, yeah, some of you going for letters, but it doesn't work for all of them. Okay, I'll go down through and say thank you very much for having a go at those, practicing those questions. So number 8, we would be looking at D, or C as the answer, but D is the letter because it makes word, a den, find, and dice. The number 9 we would be putting the P in there for loop, peak, weep, and pull. And then the last one, and I do find this one quite interesting actually, because there are lots of words that you can make with a lot of those letters, but it's the one that makes all four. And I have to say, if you have gone for T, then you are wrong. It isn't T. So you need to look again. It would be the K for rook, as in the bird, kick, oak, and kind. Because T-I-N-D, you won't find in any dictionary or Scrabble book. I think sometimes with building vocabulary, it can be a case of trying to introduce even just simple oral games that you can play. And I know one that I used to do with my son when he was preparing for the 11 plus was a synonyms one, where I'd say a word, he'd say a word, and we'd sort of keep going until one of us would run out. So if we were doing, I don't know, say synonyms for small, for example, then one of us would say minute, one of us would say little, the other would say tiny, the other one would say teeny weeny. Then we may play it with another word. So say big and say big, vast, massive, gargantuan. And we would just go back and forth. So it's a bit like, I suppose, how would you describe it? A bit like verbal tennis in a way, that you sort of just keep going until someone would run out. And you can do that for so many different things, whether that's, I don't know, listing animals young, or listing types of fruit, or listing types of flowers. And what we found with playing games like that is words would come up that we would need to stop and pause and focus our attentions on. And again, those kind of things are good fun. So just looking at those questions there, oak, having that knowledge of different types of tree, sycamore, birch, those kind of things. Having an understanding of words that are homophones. So peak and peak, for example. Rook. How many of your children would know what a rook is? So again, having that general knowledge, and I come back to it, a bit like we talked about when we talked about odd ones out, that general knowledge is also really, really important. I hope you're still with me on this. Let's move on to another one, shall we? Now, thought this would be a little break from us talking about words and vocabulary to actually have a look at a maths related question in verbal reasoning. You can probably remember at the beginning of the workshop, I said that there are 4 types of maths question. This is one of them, and this is called sequences or series. There's balanced equations. That's where you have the same on both sides. Something called letter sums, which is where it's a bit algebraic, where you have sort of A plus B, take away C, and then you're told what those letters represent. And then you have another one called middle number, and that's where you have 2 numbers on the outside, and you use those to make the number in the middle. Now, I'm not sure I have time necessarily today to go through every single one of those, but I did think this would certainly be one we should spend a bit of time talking about. So number sequences can come in lots of different forms. They will use the 4 operations, of course. So they'll be using addition when the number sequence is increasing in size. They might use subtraction where the numbers are getting fewer or getting less. It may use times tables. It may use division facts as well. So the first thing to establish for a child is, what is that sequence doing? Is the sequence getting bigger? Is it getting smaller? But of course, what we do know about a lot of number sequences is sometimes they will include 2 in 1. Now, we have various different names for that. Sometimes we call it leapfrogging. It's where you're jumping over another number. Sometimes we call it an alternate sequence. Now, how would I know if it was an alternate sequence? Well, there's a couple of clues. Sometimes the numbers will start big, then get small, then go big, then get small, then get big. Sometimes we know straight away it's an alternate sequence by the length of that sequence. So if you look at question 24 down here, That is a very, very long sequence. So it's probably going to have two sequences in one. So if I just bring up that one, we'll talk about that one first of all, because it is a very common one. So rather than going from 28 to 32, we're actually going to go from 28 to 25 to 22 to 19 to 16. Now, I appreciate that's not going to help us with the number we need, but now all we need to focus on are the numbers in between. So what's happening? We're taking away 5 each time. So if we take away 5 from 17, we obviously get 12. So 12 would be our missing number. Now, we do rely, particularly on these questions, on children having good basic arithmetic skills. Do they know their 6, their 7s, their 8s, their 9s, their 12, their 13 times tables? We don't have time in a Teach It Right lesson to teach them their times tables. We really rely on that as something they've got already. Of course, if a child didn't know that 9 7s is 63, we're going to stop and we're going to help them. We're going to say, well, look, how could you learn that? Well, 10 7s are 70, we take away 7. But what we're not going to spend is hours on end developing their knowledge of times tables when actually they need to have that as a core understanding. Okay, so just again, having that knowledge is really, really important. Just looking at that, sorry, someone's gone ahead and answered some of those questions, saying about you could take away 2 on that one. I don't think that will actually get you the answer on 24, because we are taking away 5 each time. So that will get us, and we'll arrive at the answer like that. So that basic arithmetic is really, really important. For questions like these, then actually knowing things like your prime numbers, for example, knowing your squared numbers, knowing your cubed numbers. I have seen, it wasn't actually in the in an actual 11 plus test, but I know triangular numbers has appeared within books and things. So again, maybe understanding how triangular numbers are formed as well is a good thing to do. The other thing which I think is important with questions like this, and sometimes children are quite nervous about doing this in the exam, but they are allowed to do it, is actually showing the difference between the numbers. So if we take number 23 here, we've got add 4, add 3, add 4, add 3. We need to add 4. Now, by writing those numbers down, I can clearly see what the pattern is. And just having that confidence to write things down on their page. And we find certainly when we've analysed our mock exams, the children that write more down, particularly in the maths section, they tend to get a higher mark. Those children that try and always do everything in their head and are very reluctant at putting pencil on paper, they tend to find it more difficult. And I think it's lovely when children can do things mentally and they can work things out quickly, but sometimes they need a method which just guarantees they are going to get that right answer, and certainly not rushing it. So again, just making sure that they show their jumps clearly. This one here, the first one, or 22 here, is another alternate sequence. So we are missing a number as we're going along. That one is, excuse me, subtracting 1. So of course we get 23 as our answer. Number sequences are, again, can come in multiple formats. One of the other formats they sometimes present is something called the Fibonacci sequence, which is where you have 1 and 1. That makes 2. 1 and 2 makes 3. 2 and 3 makes 5. 3 and 5 makes 8. 5 and 8 makes 13. 8 and 13 makes 21. And the idea behind that, of course, is we're adding the 2 previous numbers together. And that is a specific number sequence that is called the Fibonacci sequence. And he was an Italian mathematician, and he related lots of things, even leaves growing, to this Fibonacci sequence. But it's one to point out, because if you were to look at the difference between the numbers, it wouldn't necessarily always reveal exactly what was going on. So you can do that in other ways, whereby, for example, if you start with 7 and 8, you could add those two together to make 15, and then 8 and 15 to make 23, 15 and 23 to make 38. That is not a Fibonacci sequence, but you are still adding the two previous numbers together to get to your next total. So number sequence is something we explore quite a bit at Teach It Right, in terms of making sure children know all the variations, all the different types of number sequences that could come up. And this would be a question type which could be included in the verbal reasoning exam. But I think it's also worth pointing out, number sequences could also appear, or one or two could appear, within the math section of the exam. So we still think this is really important to be able to focus on. Are there any questions anyone has around number sequences? Okay. Again, it's all about building up their confidence with these kind of skills. I think with number sequences, they probably have done it maybe a little bit at school, but we tend to find just the complexities of it are not as advanced as what the 11 plus would be. Okay, let's go to another question type. I'm afraid we're back to words again. I did say there was a lot more word-related question types. This is one of my favorites, in actual fact. I do like this one. I think this one's good fun. I don't always necessarily know exactly what it tests. I suppose it tests a knowledge of spelling, a knowledge certainly of four-letter words. But the idea behind this one is children are given a sentence. They don't need to read the sentence because that's not important. It's about looking between the gaps to find a hidden four-letter word. Now, if you want your child to practice this, just grab a reading book. So you have a reading book, they have a reading book. One of you shouts out a page number. So just say page 27. You both go to that page in your individual book, page 27, and it's the first person to find a hidden four-letter word on that page. And I call it a page race. My own children really enjoy playing that game, and certainly just a good way of making this kind of question type really good fun. So let's just go through exactly what we've got to do so everyone's clear. So the sentence, as I say, is provided, and we're going to be looking between the gaps to find a hidden four-letter word. What are the combinations of letters that we could have? Well, we could have 3 and 1. So 3 letters from the end of one word, 1 letter. The hidden word, for the example, is mend. Yeah, fantastic. Well done. Good spot. So we've got 3 and 1. We've got 1 and 3. We've got 2 and 2. Now, I sometimes think about those as in scores in game of football or hockey. So we've got 3, 1, 1, 3, 2, 2. We can't have 4-0 because that would be a word on its own. We're not looking for a word on its own. We're looking for a word that comes between the gaps. And as someone within the chat has rightly pointed out to us very quickly, mend is a hidden 4-letter word. So we take the M from film and then END from ended. Now, if we were looking at what combination is that, that is 1 letter and then 3 letters. What could be difficult in a question like this? Can I open that up to everybody? What would children find hard about this?
I think it's making sure they read without the gap, because we teach them about finger spaces and then just putting them together.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a sort of a scanning exercise, but you have to scan those gaps to try and find those 4-letter words. I think the other thing which makes these difficult, of course, is knowing, is it a 4-letter word or not? So actually having a good knowledge of vocabulary is important, but knowing the letter strings that potentially would go together as well, that you would know that, I don't think there's any word in the English language, is there, with 3 L's, for example, together. There are certain letter strings which you will never see together. So sometimes you can do it whereby you sort of do it as a process of elimination, where you go through each gap and you go, well, it can't be there. No, I don't believe there's a word hidden there. I'll go to the next one. And of course, if you do come across one and you're not sure whether it's a 4-letter word or not, then you would move to the next gap. I think the other thing which I think children do find a little bit challenging with this question type is the time that they are expected to do it in. That you've got to try and find that hidden 4-letter word quite quickly. So sometimes children are encouraged to use their thumbs to block letters out, if that makes it easier. Sometimes children will go directly to the multiple choice sheet, and I would certainly recommend that all children really do that. Once they know what to do, if we just blow this up a little bit bigger, why don't we just go straight there and we'll just scan down vertically rather than going across horizontally to find that hidden 4-letter word. And actually that's probably a quicker and easier step to do. So if we look at 38 here, we've got tail between not and alerted. We've got pool between shampoo and left. We've got, now this is one I haven't done yet, so we've got swan there between visitors and wondered. And then we've got span between grasp and another. So again, you could see the efficiency with that once you know what you've got to do and you understand the question type, I might as well just go straight to my multiple choice sheet. I often tell this story about this particular question type, and I'm going back quite a few years now. It's when GL was previously in Buckinghamshire before CM came in and then GL came back. But I remember this question type being one of the first that children had to do in one year. And I remember boys saying to me, oh, hidden 4-letter words came up. While I was looking at the multiple choice sheet before the exam started, I worked out most of them already. So he'd scanned over his multiple choice sheet and he was able to pick up those. And I'm sure that did give him an advantage to being able to know what those answers were. It was just being a little bit shrewd, a little bit canny. You know, he didn't write anything down. He was merely just looking at his multiple choice sheet. Obviously, they hadn't given his question paper out, but he was able to have a look at that first before it did come around and able to answer those questions. So there we go, hidden 4-letter words. One of the other games that you can play with this, another sort of quite good fun one, you can do word chains. So we'll use the word veto. We had that earlier, didn't we? And then we're going to make another 4-letter word beginning with the last letter. So we're going to go with oven. Then we're going to do another 4-letter word now beginning with N. We're going to do next. Then we're going to do tone. And then we're going to do ends, and you can see how this could go on. And you could actually spend a lot of time just doing this, having a bit of fun, trying to think of words beginning with that last letter, but they must be 4 letters long. And then what you can do is say, oh, who got the most, who created the most words in 2 minutes or 3 minutes. I think, again, if you can make these questions fun and engaging at home when you are practicing them, it just makes it so much more interesting for the children. I think sometimes when they're just working through books and doing questions, it does get a little bit mundane. So anything just to liven it up, just to make it more interesting. So that's quite a good fun one to do. Okay. We're going to move on now to have a look at a code-related question. And this is called double letter series. And it is one that is in the GL Assessment Familiarisation booklet. This does not appear in a Reading Boys exam. So just to reiterate, we've been talking about a lot of word-related questions that could very much come into Reading Boys, but not this one. This would be specific to GL Assessment. So if you've got any children that are going for Kendrick or that Slough Consortium, or those 13 grammar schools in Buckinghamshire, this could very likely appear. And it relies on a knowledge of the alphabet. And we know children know the alphabet from A to Z. That's great. But are they able to count between the letters? Do they know that the alphabet is also a mirrored alphabet, that you have A, Z, B, Y, C, X, D, W, E, V, and so on until you get to M and N? Do they also recognize what happens when you get to Z? Where do I count now? Well, it is like a continuous loop. So I always think of the alphabet not necessarily in a straight line, but actually in a circle. Because when I get to Z, I actually have to jump back to A. And sometimes in the exam, I actually say to children, why don't you add a little bit of the alphabet on? Because when you are counting from, say, W to B, you'll make that easier by having all those letters written out, ready to go. The idea behind these questions is that children have to work out the next two letters in the sequence. And I think when we were talking earlier about what verbal reasoning involves, someone mentioned sequences as being one of the question types. So let's have a little look, shall we, at what that looks like. So just taking again another snippet from a GL paper, just to give you a little bit of an idea. I'm just going to bring that to the front, if that's okay. Right, there we go. So let's have a look at 45. So really important that children count from the first letter of each pair. If they go, for example, on this first one that we've got U to D, they're going to get it wrong. So they need to go in this one, U to V to W to X. Now they are all sequential, so it does make it a lot easier. There they are, U, V, W, X. So we know what the first letter will be. It will be Y. Once a child has got that first letter, we then encourage them to look at their multiple choice sheet, because it can be, and I'm not saying this would happen very often, but it might on one or two questions, when you have the first letter, you may not need to do the second. And that, of course, is a time saver. Anything in the exam that can grab me back 30 seconds or so gives me time somewhere else. So if we think about the fact I've got the Y, and if I look at my answer options, I've got 3 Ys. I've got a YL, a YK, and a YM. So I'm actually going to get rid of the options that were Zs. And it just limits my choice a little bit. And again, if you were, say, down to 2 options, there's a 50-50 chance of getting that right. And it's all about percentages sometimes with an exam like this. There's no negative marking. If a child gets one wrong, that's not going to affect their it's not going to be a case of deducting marks like that. So, it's really important that kind of elimination and things like that are deployed really. So once we've got the first letter established and we've eliminated, we then move to the second letter. So this is D to F. So we find D, we find F, and we can see that's 2 jumps. It's not about the letters in between. Sometimes when children first do these, they might say, oh, there's 1 letter. But it's the amount of jumps that you're doing. So in that instance, we would say +2. And of course, the reason we're saying plus is because we're going forwards in the alphabet rather than going backwards. Then we go from F to H, and you can see there another quite simple jump, another +2. My rule is always do 3. So the next one, we do H to J, which is also +2. The reason I do 3 is because it could go +2, +2, -3, -3. So it's important you do 3 as your golden rule, and then you can establish what that pattern is. So if we go to J and we add 2 on, we know we're going to get L. So L would be my second letter. So the answer is B. Sometimes with these, they can be quite long. And again, like we were talking about with the number sequences, that could involve you actually doing an alternate sequence or some form of leapfrogging. So again, that's just being aware of that. I would just share this one with you very quickly, just because, of course, it is a slightly different way of jumping. So we've got Z, W, T, and Q. So the first jump is Z to W. And if we go 1, 2, 3, we're actually going backwards 3. So in the gap, we'd say -3, W to T. We're going to then go 1, 2, 3 again, -3. I'm assuming T to Q is -3 as well. 1, 2, 3. And then we go to Q, -3. 1, 2, 3 is N. And again, I can cross out those ones that don't have N. I'm down to 2, which again just limits my choices. One of the things you'll notice, though, certainly with the answers here, I've got N and C and N and D. Well, of course, D and C are next to each other in the alphabet. So that element of counting accurately is really important. You probably see on the alphabet at the top, I've actually shown those jumps. Sometimes I'll do a dot. So I'll put a dot where I start from and where I need to get to. So again, that can help me with my jumps. What you will never see is very, very large jumps. So I'm never, for example, going to be going from C to V going forwards. That's too many jumps. A child wouldn't be expected to do that. But what I might be expected to do is go the other way. So actually go C to V like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. A jump of 7 is certainly very plausible in the 11 plus. So just understanding that a child would never be expected to go from C to V. The other thing which I did just mention briefly earlier is the fact that the alphabet is mirrored. So if I was to draw a mirror line down the middle, down here, every letter has a pair, and there are 13 pairs. And the way we teach it right, to know those 13 pairs is we relate it to animals. So angry zebras, batty yaks, catty x-rays, wild dogs, elephant vets, ugly frogs, great tigers, happy squirrels, impatient rhinos, jumping quails, kindly penguins, lucky owls, and muddy newts. Now, don't worry, I don't expect you to remember those. I will send you within the link that we send out a way of remembering those. So I'll send you that mnemonic. So again, your children will become very familiar with that, certainly when we get round to teaching them codes. Are there any questions on double letter series at all? Anything anyone wants to ask about those? Okay. There is another one very similar to that, which is called letter analogies. I won't spend time doing it now, but it does also rely on that knowledge of the alphabet in terms of counting between the letters. Okay, let's go and have a look at another one. So this is another code-related question. And the idea behind this one is that children are given 4 words and then 3 number codes. And they have to match the number codes with the words. I'll make this one a little bit larger for everybody, just so we can see it. The reason for the big box there is just to cover up the solution. But what we've got here is a matching activity, really. It's about matching those letters with the right numbers. And then there would be a question. And the question might say, what is the code for kite? Or it might say, what word can you make from the code 3512? So the first part of this question is about matching. It's about matching up the numbers with the correct letters. And the way that the children need to do it is look for repeating numbers or repeating letters, depending on which way they're doing it, or also numbers or letters that appear in the same position. Now, the interesting thing here is to look at all of these free codes, all of these number codes here, and realize that they all contain the number 5. And if we have a look along there, we're looking for a letter that appears within 3 of the words. And you might have noticed that the I appears within 3 of them. The other thing to mention here as well is that we're going to look for numbers or letters where the 2 are together that are the same. So we've got 5 and 7 at the end of one word, 5 and 7 at the beginning of another. They have to be the same letters. And you might have noticed, I hope you can all see on the screen, we've got I and N and I and N. So we know then that I and N goes there. And I need to write quite small to make sure that it's all lined up. Thank you very much for coming along. Someone's got to jump off the call. I appreciate it's a long time to listen to me, but I will send out a link. So thank you very much for coming along. I hope you found it beneficial. So I and N, and then we've got I and N here. So that means that that must be into, and then this must be pain. Now, sometimes when you are left with a code, you can see, well, what do I already know? Well, I know the 5 is an I. The 3, the 1 and the 2, the 1 has appeared, which was the T. I don't know about the 2 and the 3 yet, but of course, it's not going to be poet. It's going to be kite. Sorry, it's a little bit difficult to write very small on the screen, but you get how a child would need to do it to make sure that those numbers and those letters are all very neatly lined up. So the word that was superfluous to this was, of course, poet. Now, interestingly, I could be asked for the code for poet because I know what the P is, I know what the O is, I know what the E is, and I know what the T is. So sometimes in the questions, they will ask the children, what's the code for that word, even though it wasn't one that I had to match up. Now, these do take a little bit of skill. Children have, and sometimes, I sometimes would describe this really as trial and error. You might try something and it doesn't work. You haven't been able to match up, or no, you haven't quite worked out what those letters or those numbers stand for, and that's absolutely fine. You know, sometimes when you do puzzles and things, I again do treat these like puzzles. I think it is just worth knowing that sometimes you won't get it straight away, and that's fine. Have a go. Rub it out, start again, try and go back to what you know, try and look for those letters, all those numbers in the same position. Are there any questions on that particular one at all? I think it's important to... Hi, Tony.
Hi, Chris. Is there any... I mean, this looks quite an involved question, takes quite a lot of time, so this comes down to exam technique and spotting how long you should be spending on this.
Definitely.
Presumably.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point, Tony, actually, because it could well be that you actually maybe leave these maybe to the end and you go and do something that actually you can gain more marks on.
I was going to say, so, do they give the marks on the paper so you can judge?
No. So every question in the 11 plus is worth 1 mark.
Okay.
But you could imagine with this, you would then have a series of questions underneath. So it might be, what's the code for kite? What's the code for 5716? So this process at the beginning, as you say, is very involved. There's a lot you need to try and do there first. So that might take you a couple of minutes to actually do that. But after that, then you go to the questions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I think what's also worth stating here as well is that some of the questions that we've seen tonight, those ones like synonyms, antonyms, for example, the expectation is that children would do those a lot quicker. These kind of questions, and there are other ones like this that do take more technique, do involve more strategy. And it is all about practice. The more you do of these, the better and the quicker you certainly will get. Rima, so you've got your hand up.
I have, yes. Hi.
Hi, Rima,
thank you for this. It really helps. Is there going to be, because I'm just trying to understand, is it just the one sort of question that has like a set of these in it, or are there going to be a few different ones on a regular GL test? Is it just the one code?
Yeah, so if you look at So there's approximately 21 different types of verbal reasoning question that GL potentially could use. For Reading boys, a lot less. They would say have 10 different types of questions they could select from. But in an exam, typically, you probably have 10 or 12 different types of question. So this could be one of them. You might have 2 maths ones. You might have 5 word related ones. So what's important from our perspective, and unfortunately in a 2-hour session, we're not going to get through every single verbal reasoning question type. I wouldn't want to do that because I think we wouldn't really be having enough time to talk about them in certainly the detail I'd want. But what we would obviously do within the course is cover all these different question types with the children. And certainly in this block, yeah, we covered a lot of the word related ones, but when we get into the next verbal reasoning block, we'll start exploring, things like codes, things like the maths related questions. And then it is about repetition. It's about going through those again. Just because you've done it once doesn't always mean a child will necessarily know the approach. And I think we also will ensure that over the summer months we do a lot of revision camps and mock exams and things, and even over the Easter, whereby we have other opportunities to go through these kind of questions, because it is very new to them. This isn't something that they would have potentially done within their own schooling. I don't know many children that would have done certainly something like the question we're just looking at now, but this is a slightly unique type of question. And things like synonyms and antonyms, may have talked about that certainly within their own classroom, but we will ensure by the time that children get round to their test that they are very familiar with the different types of questions. We got some really good feedback this year in terms of what came up, and we were very I suppose reassured that we had covered those within our course and that children were as familiar as they could be. We don't know which ones will be put in the exam, I'm afraid, but I think from Teach It Right's point of view, it's about coverage. It's about making sure that we cover all those different types of questions.
Brilliant,
okay, thanks. Okay, guys, what we're going to do now, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time just talking to you about a couple of different sort of activities and games that we know enhances things like vocabulary. So just a couple of different word games. I'm sure lots of these you've probably heard of before. One is bananagrams. I've got one here, which I think they do it now in pears and apples and things like that now. But the idea, it's a bit like if you've ever played Scrabble. It's like Scrabble, but without a board. And children choose, I think it's about 21 letters each. And the idea is that they have to make as many words as they possibly can. And it's good fun. If they can't use a letter, they dump it back in the banana and they have to choose 3 more. The words have to be linked together, as you can see there on the screen. You can't spell words backwards, and the player who uses all of their letters up first is the winner. And we've had some great fun with this game over the years. Again, what we tend to do is once the children have completed it, is then talk about the words that they've made. Have they spelt them correctly? What do those words mean? Oh, obviously, with this kind of game, children are only going to make words that they already know. So actually doing it with children together and actually saying, oh, have you thought about those letters going together or making that word? But it is good fun. I know probably shouldn't mention it in October, but quite a good Christmas present to use or buy for your child, and good fun. So bananagrams, if you haven't come across that one before. It doesn't always have to be, though, going out and buying games or word games. Sometimes you can find word games in back of the newspaper or in magazines, or just create your own on a piece of paper. When I was growing up, my mum used to buy something called the Western Morning News, which was a newspaper in our local area, and on the back of it was a word wheel. And we often used to play this game whereby you'd have a wheel of letters, a letter in the middle. And the idea is that you try and make as many words as you can, but you have to use that letter in the middle. I think the words also have to be more than three letters long. And then you have a series of categories. And it's all about trying to get as high as you possibly can or make as many words as you can, depending then how many you make, you fall into that category. And it's just good fun. There is also hidden within the letters that are there are 9 letters there. There is also a 9-letter word as well. And it is whether you can discover that 9-letter word. So word wheels, very similar game. Words from a word. So perseverance, how many words could you make from perseverance? And you can see there, look, lots of words that have been made. Again, these are probably things that you've probably thought of before, but very simple. Little categories do work because kids, of course, don't want to just be in okay. They want to get to good or get to very good, particularly if you can dangle the carrot and have a little prize if they do get a certain number of words. But what it should do, like any word game, it should generate some discussion about spellings, about letter strings, talking about the meanings of words. So, I don't know, talking about perseverance here, crane. I'm pretty sure children would know crane as in the crane that helps with building works. Do they know the crane, the animal, the bird? So again, a bit like when we talked about rook earlier, again, just having that opportunity to talk to children about word meanings. I also believe imagery is very, very powerful. And if we talk about the word crane, I'll just type in this into Google. That one of the things that you may well like to do with your child at home when you are spending time working on word things is actually also show them pictures. So this is a crane, bird. And again, it just brings it to life. It's not just a word on the page. It means something. And it's also something that they are more likely to retain. And I know that over the years, there's a company called Mrs. Wordsmith, which has a lot of words which they've illustrated. I think they were from the film Madagascar, and they illustrated a number of words, made them funny. And they're absolutely brilliant resource, particularly for the 11 plus, because a lot of the words are very much 11 plus related. So Mrs. Wordsmith, if you haven't come across that before, another good resource potentially to use. We did talk earlier about flashcards, and I did share with you one of my favourite ones, but this is another one. This is a lady called Mary Farquhar, who we do see actually quite regularly when we work with the 11 plus verbal reasoning workshops, and she often comes along, and I will certainly invite her this year as well. She's produced a number of vocabulary cards, things like compound words, lots of different ones. So again, this may well be a very, very good one to purchase. Quite expensive, but again, well worth its money in the sense that every year people send her lists of words that have come up in the exams, and she sort of compiles them, a bit similar to the Christine Draper book. I need to update this table because, of course, we've just had children taking their exams in September. But I thought you might be interested to see from Buckinghamshire the previous year what was there, what question types appeared. So our focus, of course, today has been on verbal reasoning, and you'll be interested to see the question types that did appear: double letter series, hidden 3-letter word, move a letter, odd 2 out. There was also a new GL question type, which we are aware of, which again we have fed into our course, which involves anagrams. And again, children would get exposure to that. That isn't a definitive list. Of course, as we said earlier, there would be about 10 to 12 different types of questions that would appear. But the interesting thing here is that it was 12 minutes. Ignore the number of questions. That was, I say, just applicable to that year. We don't believe that's something they've repeated again. But again, it just gives you an idea. 12 minutes was the length of the verbal reasoning section. I believe this year as well, there was balanced equations that appeared. So they are still drawing on those maths questions as well. But I will update this. This is something that we will send out to you once we've had a little bit of time just to collate that information from this year. Tony.
Did you mean 12 minutes or 25 minutes?
So sorry, yeah. So I've got rid of the 12 questions there. 25 minutes for the verbal reasoning section. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, 25 minutes. And it is important to recognise that once the English comprehension and SPAG is done, the child cannot go back to that section again. So once the 25 minutes is up, they're not allowed back to that. Rima.
Hi, it's Rima's husband here. So sorry,
Oh,
just
hi.
one quick question. Yeah. So I can see like there's tons of stuff here. Is there like a test strategy that we would talk about at some point? Like, for instance, I was thinking, to me, what logically makes sense is for the kids to go through the difficult ones later. So sort of, do the easier ones first, like low-hanging fruit, and then do multiple passes. And I guess the discussion we're having in the house is, do we really want to give them a different strategy to what you'd probably recommend? And then maybe it's a aligned strategy, as it were, that you recommend it and then we work with it when we're sort of helping them prepare. That's something that we've been thinking about.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. It sort of it comes up every year. I think that the problem I have with children, what I would describe jumping around a paper, in other words, saying, well, I'll go off and do questions 20 to 25 because they're really easy. Then I'll come back to question 1 and then I'll go back somewhere else, is do they actually lose their concentration on the multiple choice sheet, and actually the demarcation becomes not aligned. They're a bit confused about which ones they've done, which ones they haven't. So I think really the reality is we would always say start on question 1, work your way through to the end of the section. However, if there are questions like code questions, which we know take longer, and that might be double letter series, that might be the one that I shared with you at the end there where you were matching them up, potentially you can circle that question on your question paper, not on the multiple choice sheet, and then go back to that if you have time. The problem, though, you have to also realise with the timing of the 11 plus, and it's very similar to how CEM used to operate, once that time has elapsed, so once that 25 minutes is up, you won't ever be allowed to go back and look at that section again. Unlike when, perhaps you and I were at school, you're given a certain amount of time to do an exam, say it's an hour long, well, you can actually go wherever you like. Whereas with this, the time is slightly more restrained, that the requirement really is to get as many questions done in that time as you possibly can. I mean, of course, the reality is, and what we want to happen, we want children to complete it. We want children to get through all of those questions in the time allowed. But that element of time management is still, though, important, because if there are certain questions children do know that they struggle on, they find more difficult, we would rather they left those to later, because it's about accruing marks. The more marks they get, the better chance of getting a good mark and passing. So I think it is very dependent on children's understanding of the question types and how long they potentially take, and that is also going to only improve, that as children get more familiar with the question types, then their knowledge and understanding of what to do will get better. I don't know if that answers your question, Dad, or not really, but it is something, of course, as we go through the year, we will talk to the children a little bit more about.
No, it does. Thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate that. No, it's a very good answer. Thank you very much.
And a couple of other hands up.
Chris, hi, it's Alan. Apologies. Why did you cross where it says 12 questions?
Yeah, sorry, that's not applicable for this year. That's not how many were per question type. There's the 12 questions really should have related to the NVR section, not the verbal reasoning one. So in verbal reasoning, there tends to be about seven or so. The 12 questions appear within non-verbal, but that is sectioned up. So about 5 minutes per section for 12 questions in each. So I think it was odd one out, matrices, sequences, block counting, and vertical codes. So sorry, it was my mistake that I'd put it in the wrong part.
All right,
So
okay.
ignore that completely. 25 minutes, there would have been in the region of about 40 questions altogether.
Fine. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Guys, thank you very, very much. As I say, this has been recorded. We probably covered off about half the question types in the verbal reasoning. We will do another session like this, so please do come along, and I'd be more than happy to sort of cover off the ones that we haven't spent time looking at. But I guess the main thing to sort of mention is that we will cover all of these at Teach It Right with your child. I think verbal reasoning is certainly something to be enjoyed. I think it's very really good to be able to build your vocabulary and learn new words. And that's something we really encourage at Teach It Right. And I would really encourage you as well to be hungry to learn new words. We're all learners in that respect. And I certainly enjoy learning new words and trying to sort of show some enthusiasm for it for my own children, and I think that has rubbed off. So they're avid readers, they like reading. I think that is one of the crucial things about building vocabulary. But again, I hope you've enjoyed this session, hope you've found it useful. If you ever have any questions about verbal reasoning question types, or you're not quite sure on the approach or the techniques, you just need to ask. As I say, we've got a lot of knowledge around the types of questions they use for GL, and I'm more than happy to share that with our families. So thank you very much for coming, and please do come along to future workshops that we do on non-verbal maths and English as we go through the year. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye. Thanks very much.
Chris, can I quickly ask something?
Pause.
With regards to future workshops that are going to be held, how do we come to know? Do you kind of send an email?
Yeah,
around?
we'll send an email out.
Okay.
What we'll probably do when we've got a few more dates in the diary, we will also put them obviously on the website. So they'll we usually do one subject every block. So
Right.
in the next block, in block 2, we will be focusing on non-verbal reasoning. As I say, I have recorded this session today, so we'll send you out a link as well, so you're able to watch it back. I do like to do them face to face actually as well in some of the centres, but we didn't have a great take up for that this year, and I think it can be some people prefer to do them online, which is fine, but certainly ones towards the end of the year where we're talking about exam technique and we're hearing from our previous families and children, I think it would be good if people can come in and come into halls and see us face to face. But
No,
I guess
brilliant. It was
blame the pandemic for that.
it was really useful, and it would be useful to know more of an update with regards to, because this was the first GL cohort.
In Berks,
It
yeah.
would be interesting to know how the kids found it and what sort of format.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely do that, and I've got a lot of information back from our families already this year, and also sort of quite detailed about the types of questions that were there, and that can change year on year, but of course it's good to get that feedback so it informs our course and we're as up to date as we can be. But yeah, look out for that, because there will be lots more information that will be sent across.
Of course. No, thank you so much. It was really useful. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Bye. Bye.
Hi, Lisa.
Thank you. Sorry, Chris. I would like to ask you about the master classes, about the creative writing.
Yes,
Are
of
you
course.
planning to do any other dates? Unfortunately,
Yeah,
Harry
we
has
will.
some clubs.
Yeah, I think we do 2 rounds of creative writing masterclasses through the year. I think the other ones could be after Easter, the next
After
round of creative.
Easter.
I mean,
Okay.
of course, we're doing creative writing in the lessons and during the course. This is just a case, I suppose, of saying that, you know, we know how important the creative writing is for Reading boys. So we will be adding in those masterclasses as the year goes on. So yeah, if you can't make this round, don't worry, there will be more.
Yes. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Because all of them are on a Wednesday. He has his
Oh, no
club.
worries.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
perfect.
will
Thank
do
you.
those.
Thank you
Thanks a
very much
lot.
for today.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.